Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. Welcome back to iRacing and welcome to the Car Viewer. Yes, we have the Mercedes. First of all, I just want to acknowledge a couple of things. Number one, I want to acknowledge the great Chris Hay, who in his review of this car, he said that it might be the most important car in all of sim racing. I tend to agree with that assumption, that assertion, that overall statement. Why? Not because of the car that it is. Not because that it's the fastest thing that we've gotten in iRacing ever. Not because it's just got ridiculous performance all around. But because Mercedes and iRacing have a partnership that allows them to give us this. This is the Mercedes Formula One car. As of recording this car is still active. I'm recording this on the Friday of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix weekend, the last weekend of the 2021 Formula One season, and it's still all to play for. The Constructors Championship, although very heavily biased in the favor of Mercedes, is still undecided, and the Drivers' Championship is absolutely bang on dead even between Lewis Hamilton, who drives this car, and Max Verstappen of Red Bull. So iRacing and Mercedes have a relationship that allows them to say, we want to take your active service Formula One car and put it in the most accurate racing simulator that's available to consumers in 2021. And Mercedes say, all right, it sounds like a pretty cool idea. Let's do it. And let's give it to everybody while the car is still active. This thing is going to qualify tomorrow. Two of them are going to qualify tomorrow. They're probably going to be in Q3. One of them is very likely to be on pole position at the end of all of that. This is the most accurate all-around racing sim available to consumers. We're talking about thousands of different data points, hundreds of different performance parameters, all of the little bits and bobs here on the front wing, the barge boards, everything. These are all very closely guarded trade secrets. And Mercedes told iRacing, you know what? Go ahead and model it. When it comes to the performance, yeah, go ahead and model it. Emulate this thing as best as you can. We want the end user to get the most authentic experience possible, given the limitations of the simulator software and given the limitations of the end user in terms of their equipment. But we want this thing to be authentic, we want it to be believable, and we want it to be representative of the great brand that Mercedes-Benz is. Because let's also remember that Mercedes-Benz, in the form of the Benz Pottenwagen, they made the first ever internal combustion-powered road car all the way back in 1886. That's the history, that's the provenance, and that's, in all, what's riding on a release like this. Yes, it's a Formula One car. Yes, it's ridiculously fast. We're going to have a lot of fun with it, but it's a Mercedes. There is no other first car company, and this is the race car that represents the first car company in 2021 at the top of the Formula One World Championship, which is widely regarded as the top of motorsport, period. That's what this car is. And that's why I have to agree with Chris Hay when he calls this the most important car in sim racing. It's not that we have not had anything like this before. Very famously, over on the Assetto Corsa side of the world, Race Sim Studio have absolutely moved mountains with their Formula Hybrid series. Since 2017, they have given us a car every year, in addition to a couple experimental versions of Formula Hybrid based on 2022 regulations. However, this is the real deal. This, my friends, is as close as you and I will ever get to being anywhere near the Mercedes W12. And we get to have this very granular sort of experience with it without anything really hidden from us. If you're going to be driving this car in any semblance of a competitive manner, you have to get into the nuts and bolts. You have to understand what it is, why it does what it does, how it works, and how you can extract performance from it. That's what iRacing is about. That's what all those setup options are about. That's what laser scanning every track is about. That's what the constant refinement of the physics and tire models in this sim is all about. And that's what Mercedes told iRacing, yeah, we want you to do that with our active duty race car. Mind blown. Anyway, we're looking at the car in the 3D viewer here, which is a new addition here in 2021 to iRacing. And it's not the best, I'll give you that. We can't really get any semblance of a free camera here to look around. We can't get in super close to see a lot of the details. You see, this is as close as I can get in if we want to see the entirety of the front wing. But we can just start to glean some of the details on this car. Obviously, all of us are well familiar with what this car actually looks like because we've seen it on TV now for the 21st weekend of 2021. And we've got all sorts of crazy things going on aerodynamically, but it's all been modeled here in iRacing. And it's nothing new to iRacing. We have some of the most talented modelers in sim racing working for this company. And I've got to say, apart from Race Sim Studio and VRC on the Assetto Corsa side of the world, you don't see handiwork like this in racing sims, even in 2021. So just on the overall macrocosmic appearance of all of this, hats off to iRacing. You've done an absolutely fantastic job. And I do have to wonder about that collaboration with Mercedes in terms of what did you use to model this car? Did you have one of those really expensive 3D scanner things that shoots a million laser beams at a subject and it spits back a data trace and the computer kind of has a rough 3D model already pre-built? I don't know. Maybe they did. I don't know what sort of technology iRacing really have at their disposal and what Mercedes allowed them to do, but this thing looks really, really good, both from a distance as well as up close, even though most of the time when we're out on track, you will see none of this, because when you're nestled in this cockpit, you're just looking at the steering wheel and, on occasion, your mirrors, and that's about it. But just taking a look overall at this thing, all that detail in the rear end, the brake ducts there with the little winglets over top of them, they were chopped down a little bit for this year, but they're still pretty complicated and they're all still there. The diffuser, we have got 4 layers of almost paper-thin carbon there, relatively speaking, making up the diffuser outlet here, and of course the 2 main tunnels on the underside of the diffuser with a forest of strakes underneath, all angled outboard so that the air is accelerated out and pushed out the back of the car as it expands out and creates a lot of that downforce with the underbody. The exhaust there, the primary exhaust from the engine and turbocharger exhaust side, that big center pipe, and then it's flanked by the 2 wastegate exhausts there on either side. It's so cool. The big hole in the back of the car, which is really for engine cooling and exhausting the radiator, but it's also got an aerodynamic benefit, of course. You can just visualize how much air would be funneled through there and shot out over the beam wing around the rear crash structure for more downforce. The top wishbones there of the rear suspension also getting in on the action, as are the pull rods. We've got this little winglet that is flanking the exhaust, just from the exhaust center line there outboard just about to the brake duct area. That's so cool. Rear wing proper, of course. DRS naturally. Great details on the engine cover. Pretty quiet aerodynamically speaking in these days, but still the shaping of everything. You can see how those side pods are sculpted with all of this space to play with on the flanks of the floor there, moving inboard from the reference plane. The little vortex generators along the edge of the reference plane and little strakes feeding the top side of the diffuser. Moving forward again, the barge board, the Venetian blind details, the turning vanes, all kinds of things here. That integration of the turning vane with the mirror support stalk and then the mirror support stalk proper, creating this little eyelash effect over the mirror fairings. And it's all here. It's absolutely all here. If you look at the high-res photos that a lot of the news websites post nowadays after a Grand Prix, you've seen all of this stuff in reality, and it's all here in iRacing, and it's just fantastic. Really, it is, and it's almost a shame that we're in the cockpit so often because, yeah, we love driving these cars, but they're just so cool to look at visually. And unfortunately, we only get to see the cockpit when we're actually enjoying what the car can do. But there's so much here, and I don't know, it gives me more reason to record tons of hot lap replays and spam them all over YouTube. But absolutely, I love it. You'll see the cockpit in much greater detail in a couple of minutes, of course, but you can see the work that they've done in there. The areas that you will never see, like you're seeing these little lines that are carrying probably some hydraulic fluid for the brake bias adjust, but really electrical umbilicals you're seeing there going back toward the center of the car, behind the cockpit to the ECU and assorted electrical componentry back there. You'll never see this when you're driving the car, but it's in there. The seat is there. The carbon texturing on the seat is there. The back of the steering wheel is there with the brake magic button. The car actually does have usable brake magic. Paddles on the back for the gear shift and clutch. It's all there. They did not skimp on anything with the model, even though it's not something necessarily that iRacing, I would say, takes as a #1 priority, because obviously we're a racing simulator. We want the driving to be authentic. But the car really does look the part, and you're about to see that it also very much performs the part. We're going to take this thing out and put it through its paces. Stand by. Welcome to the Hungaroring. Why are we at the Hungaroring for this? Well, quite simply, I like this place. I think the Hungaroring gets a bad rap as being a procession. It's boring. It's it just doesn't produce good racing. Did you see the 2021 race? Did you see who won that? No, it was not Lewis Hamilton or Valtteri Bottas or Max Verstappen or Sergio Perez or any of those other guys. It was Esteban Ocon who won this race. How did he do that? Because his teammate is Fernando Alonso, and he did an absolutely brilliant job of being a rear gunner. But all credit to Alpine. It was a brilliant strategy, and it resulted in a great maiden Grand Prix win for Ocon. However, I really think that in addition to being one of my favorite tracks, I think that the Mercedes does particularly well around places like this that are very technical, that are not necessarily the fastest in terms of straight line speed, but they have got a lot of different types of corners, and a lot of those different types of corners are packed in very close proximity. So I think it's representative in terms of demonstrating the capabilities of the car. And also, Lewis Hamilton did get pole position for that race in 2021 with a 1:15.419. And perhaps it gives us a barometer to aim for. Fastest lap of the race was set by Pierre Gasly, actually, 1:18.394, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. First of all, we need to take a look at what we get with this car in terms of what we can do with it. We go into the garage, first of all, and we see a pretty typical iRacing setup screen. We've got different tire compounds to choose from. This is also new for 2021. We have soft, medium, and hard. Every value that you see on all of these screens is default. So, and by default, I mean iRacing setups. Look at what you get. You get Barcelona, Hockenheim, Hungaroring, Imola, Interlagos, Monza, Montreal, Nürburgring, Silverstone, Spa, Spielberg, that's Austria, and Suzuka. So you get a smattering of Formula One track setups. And to be honest with you, to agree with another point that Chris Hay made in his video, I think they're all very usable. Pretty much everywhere I've driven this car, I haven't really had to change much in terms of making it into something that I personally want, because the car already has a lot of the things that I personally prefer already built in. On the chassis side of the world, here's what the suspension's doing. Not all that much in terms of suspension adjustment, and you can understand that because, yes, this is an active duty race car, so some of these things are going to be a little bit nebulous. We don't want to give away all of our secrets quite yet. We still have another 2 days of competition in this car's service life, so we're not going to divulge everything yet. I do suspect that this will become a little bit more voluminous in the coming weeks and months, though. Drive and brake. Differential, look at that. Preload, 0 foot-pounds. What is something that I do every time I get into an open-wheel car? Open up the differential. 0 foot-pound preload there. Yeah, that's pretty open. And then, of course, because these cars have electronically adjustable differentials, you can play with all of these different settings in terms of how much locking force or preload or both do you have in different parts of a corner, entry, middle, and high speed there, as you can see the different steps. If you mouse over any one of these parameters, you will get a little blurb at the bottom of the screen that shows you what these things do. And, of course, they're all going to be pretty much the same in terms of the description, depending on, because it's all under the differential category, of course. but you can change the differentials parameters for turn in, apex, and track out, or for high-speed corners where you're not braking very much, if at all, if downshifting at all, whatever. So you can fine-tune the differential for different parts of a corner, and that's something that has been on Formula One cars for, I want to say, about 25 years now, but it's here on the Mercedes, and iRacing, of course, have had to emulate that. Power unit configuration. This has everything to do with the hybrid system and basically nothing to do with the engine. The MGUK deploy mode, we've got no deploy, quality, attack, balance, and build. Balance is the default here. We're going to go to no deploy here just to start out. But engine braking here, this is basically controlling how long the throttles will hang open when you're off throttle. You get more air out the exhaust for perhaps a slight aerodynamic benefit. Defaults to step 10 there. Out of step 12, we'll keep that down at step 10. And then the brake system. We don't have just normal brake bias in this car because, of course we don't, because it's a Formula One car. We have got the base brake bias of 57% to the front. You have dynamic ramping, which is it's an adjustment in the brake bias as you apply brake. So the dynamic ramping, at this point, they're saying it begins at 50% pedal. You can adjust this in steps of 5% all the way up to 95%, or all the way down to 0%, depending on what you want. So you can basically just have the straight 57% to the front for the whole pedal travel, or you can start to migrate the bias with this, the brake migration. This is also something that the Williams FW31 does, as well as the McLaren MP430. So this is not a new feature in general, but it's also here on the Mercedes. It's now the third Formula One car in iRacing, and it's the third Formula One car on which we can play with these things. Brake migration, though. What does this do? It migrates, as it says at the bottom, the total brake bias 1% per adjustment up to a maximum of 10% at maximum brake pedal travel. Adjustable on the steering wheel marked BMIG, brake migration. And what this does, it's that bias ramping that the Williams and the McLaren both do. So you can see here, as I adjust that brake migration, the total brake bias will go from 57% to the front at step 1, or all the way up at step 10, 66% to the front there. So as I get to 50% brake application on the pedal, what will then happen is the bias will ramp up from 57% to 66% relative to the front axle. And of course, you can adjust that to your heart's content as well. You would use these two settings in conjunction with each other, with your base brake bias being the overall barometer, and then the brake migration, depending on how much more bite you want on the front brakes, depending on where you are with the brake application, moderated by that dynamic ramping setting. So pretty sophisticated stuff. Lastly, though, brake magic. The brake magic, this is a system that we know about on the Mercedes, and famously it caught Lewis Hamilton out at Azerbaijan, where he accidentally turned this on the restart, and it completely screwed his day. But what is this thing? Well, it's a system that allows the front tires to maintain temperature by building brake temperature when the car is going slowly, so under safety car conditions, things like that. What does it do? It puts the brake bias all the way up to the front. And at this point, it's putting 0.75, so 75% of the brake bias to the front axle when the brake magic is activated. You're doing this, again, to maintain or to build front tire temperature. It's pretty easy to build rear tire temperature because all of the engine's power is going through the rear axle. So if you want to build rear tire temperature, weave around a bit, do a couple of burnouts, accelerate really hard, whatever, you've got the rear tires to take care of. The fronts, though, other than weaving very aggressively and scrubbing the fronts across the track surface like we used to see Fernando Alonso do in the mid-2000s, it's harder to build the front tire temperature. So if you're going to do that in a way that's going to protect the tire life, you've got to do it through the brakes and let that heat radiate from the brake disc into the wheel and up through the tire structure there. So it's going to maintain and or build carcass temperature in the tire so that when the green flags come back out, it's bang on ready to go. That's brake magic. What caught out Lewis Hamilton with it, though, is he left it on, or rather he turned it off and accidentally turned it back on at the wrong moment in Azerbaijan. And when he jumped on the brakes for turn 1, suddenly he had, for argument's sake, 75% of his braking force on the front axle and only 25% relatively on the rear, which means he's not going to stop very well. He locks up his front axle and he tumbles to the back of the field, finishing well out of the points. But that's brake magic. Notes, you get some notes here, not so voluminous, not nearly as detailed as they probably could be for a car like this, but it does give you some useful points about how to set this car up. Just some very small, very short explanations as to what these things do. Talks about the front wing to move the aero balance forward, and the rear gurney can be useful in countering an aero imbalance situation. If you need a lot of front downforce, you don't want that center of pressure to be too far forward because then the rear will be unstable, and you can sort of ratchet that back toward the center of the car with the gurney flap on the rear wing. Mechanical adjustments, talking about what the suspension does, roll rates and ride heights and things like that. Doesn't really give you any sort of pointers in terms of where to put these settings, but look at these default setups preloaded and you'll get a decent idea of where things should be to get reasonable performance. And then the tire compounds, of course, we all know that the soft is the fastest with the least amount of life and the hard is the slowest with the most amount of life. And then, of course, you can adjust your power. You can't go up, but you can go down with your power there if you so desire. And you can also give yourself a weight penalty if for some reason you'd ever want to do that, but you can't take out any weight, unfortunately. This is the default setup with the default fuel load. Default fuel load here for Hungary is 132.3 pounds. The maximum fuel capacity on this car, though, is a lot higher than that. You can see we've got to raise our ride height if we're going to be legal, but 242.5 pounds there in terms of what we could get for maximum fuel capacity. So, yeah, we've got ourselves a lot of gas that we can carry. Remember, these cars do not refuel during the Grand Prix, so, yeah, they need to carry all the fuel that they could ever need for the race conditions. At any rate, though, enough talking from me. We need to go and drive this thing. So, remember, we are on default setup here for Hungary, is the Hungary race setup. We're on the medium tire, and just take a look at what's in this cockpit. We mentioned we can't see any of the rest of the car from the cockpit, but from what we can see in the cockpit, there's plenty to look at here. The modeling on this steering wheel is absolutely great. Not only do you get the shape of the steering wheel right and the buttons and rotary switches along the bottom right, but you see a very dim reflection in that LCD in the center of the steering wheel. That is really cool. I like that. Doesn't do anything. It doesn't really. It actually sometimes it makes it a little bit difficult to read this display if you've got the sun low behind you. But it's just that attention to detail that sets models like this apart, and I've remarked about similar things on, in particular, RaceSim Studio mods and Assetto Corsa, and same thing here. It just adds that little bit of an extra factor of you really paid attention to this, and it looks great. My hat's off to the iRacing team. At any rate, though, we got the ignition switched on. Watch that display. We got a splash screen, AMG, Petronas Motorsport, Mercedes, and then we get to this screen. We have 2 pages on this display. You can see, first of all, that we have got the shift lights across the top. They are flashing red, green, and blue right now because the engine has stopped and the transmission has gone into an anti-stall mode because it thinks we're about to stall. In reality, we haven't even started the engine, but whatever. You got this screen. This is the main screen that you're going to use in race conditions or in qualifying situations because it has got things like your brake bias. You see, when I make a bias adjustment, we get this green flash up here. It takes over the whole display for a couple of seconds. Just lets you know that you've made an adjustment. That 57.0, though, in the upper right, that's our brake bias. Below that, we are going to have all sorts of information about our deltas and things like that. Not active right now because we haven't turned a lap. Extreme upper right, we have a lap counter. We have a deploy mode for our MGU in the extreme upper left. And then these numbers, 1 to 8, across the top of the screen. This is a first in sim racing as far as I'm concerned. What does this mean? That is the gear sync. When a transmission like this starts to turn wheels, it needs to communicate with the engine. Because remember, we have fly-by-wire throttle actuation, and we have really fly-by-wire gear shift in a car like this, too. These are semi-automatic transmissions. There's no physical link between the driver and the gearbox. So when he pulls that paddle, he's telling a computer to command hydraulic actuators, Moog valves, and things like that to move the shift forks around and swap cogs. In order to do that, the gearbox needs to communicate with the engine to know what the RPM is, and the gearbox needs to communicate with the engine further to let the ECU know what the gear ratios are, because when you command that gear change, obviously a few things need to happen, and they happen really fast in a Formula 1 gearbox. Change gear in a road car, what do? You cut the throttle, you cut the clutch in, you come out of gear, you might blip the throttle a little bit, come back into the next gear, let the clutch back out, come back into the throttle at the same time, and of course, slight variations of technique are quite often employed. However, this gearbox does all of that in milliseconds. There is no real perceptible break in power delivery as far as the driver is concerned with a Formula 1 transmission in 2021. It is so fast that it's well faster than the blink of an eye. I've heard ship times as low as in the 3 to 5 millisecond range. That's thousandths of a second. So it's happening very fast, but these are physical gears, these physical steel and other, metallic alloy objects that are crashing into each other at crazy high speeds and crazy high torque demand from the engine. I'd assume we're about 600 foot-pounds of torque from the engine minimum, never mind when we get the hybrid system coming in. So we have got a lot of torque in a modern Formula 1 engine, and these gearboxes are pretty light, only about 25, 30 kilograms or so. And that's with 8 forward gears plus reverse. So it's fragile, but it has to handle a lot of power, and it has to swap cogs very fast. So basically, that's what this display here of 1 to 8 is in the red boxes. It is the shift sync, gearbox sync learning process for the ECU. We've got another page here on the display. These are showing us tire temperatures. You can see the blue 170s. Those are the internal temperatures of the tires. And the 176s all around in white and slightly larger, those are the surface temperatures of the tires. The tires are not physically in the warmers right now in terms of what we can see, but the tires are in the warmers as we're sitting in the pit lane, so the temperature is being maintained constant, 170 carcass, 176 surface, and these are in Fahrenheit. In the center, obviously, we have got ourselves our gear position indicator showing that we are in neutral, and below that, we've got a very important readout, battery. That is our state of charge for the hybrid system, showing 100 out of 100, so we have a fully charged battery. Below that, we have Nautilus 1. What's that mean? Well, Nautilus actually means no deploy. And these are the changes for our MGU deploy maps. So right now, no deploy. We're not going to get any MGU power on this lap. We've got 5 steps that we can use. We're limited to 4 changes per lap. I'm not entirely sure why this has been done. I think what that's for is twofold. One, I think it's to sort of emulate what the FIA mandated this year in terms of changing engine maps during the race. The drivers aren't allowed to change engine maps once the race starts, so I think it's partially a nod to that, and also partially to stop people from trying to use this as a 2013-style KERS deploy, where you can just save up all of your power for strategic moments and then just spam the button and get past somebody. It's to try and level out the advantage that you get from these systems. Now, of course, you can harvest whenever you want in terms of turning it off to this no deploy mode and getting it into full charge, and you can run any mode you want at any time, but you've stuck with it basically for the whole lap, because every time you go up or down through this menu, it counts as a change. So if I go into, let's say, quali, that's 1 change. If I go back into no deploy, that's 2 changes, right? So now I've already used 2 of 4 for this lap. If I get stuck in quali mode and I want to harvest, oops, I've got to wait until we cross start finish again. So that's something to keep in mind. Very top of the screen, the 0, that's our speed in miles per hour. And then the very bottom of the screen in the center, we have water temperature, also 170 F. Enough squawking from me. We need to get this engine started. Let's do that. Engine's up. Sounds pretty good, I gotta say. Hit the pit lane speed limiter. Nothing flashes at you, but you do get the green, red, and blue lights from left to right across the top of the shift light area. And you also get this big yellow pit limb icon on the left side of this page. You go into the main page, you get a bigger pit limb icon in yellow on the left side. So we've got all of this stuff. See, the water temperature has come down a little bit as the engine is running and circulating all the water around. However, let's get out on track. We're in first gear. I do not have the clutch in because the car's doing that automatically. iRacing has chosen not to give us full control of the clutch. I kind of understand that because it's very easy to stall a car like this, but at the same time, don't like it so much. Get out on track. That's the pit limiter. Full throttle. It's going to hold us to 50 miles an hour, which is the speed limit for this track. We turn the limiter off now. And we start on our lap. Now you'll notice that we're running right now and we still have that gear sync learning protocol going on. How do we clear that? Well, in order to clear that, we need to get up into all 8 gears. And you'll see these boxes turn from red to green sequentially as we use each gear. However, to start clearing that learning protocol, we actually need to get pretty much full revs in first gear. So we'll go through the next corner, and then we're just going to basically bean it to red line in first gear. Now you'll see that the 1 has turned from red to green. That means that first gear has communicated between the gearbox control unit and the engine control unit, and now they are synced up with each other. If I shift up into second gear, you'll see what it does. There's second gear. Now second gear has been learned, and the same process is going to happen for all 8 forward ratios. See, I did it in fourth gear there intentionally. I short shifted a little bit. It did not learn fourth gear. We did not get really into the power band. Again, you've got to get it fairly close to red line in order to clear those boxes. And there's fourth gear. That was a full throttle upshift. Now it has learned fourth gear relative to third gear. And now fifth. And sixth. And seventh. We will not get into eighth until start finish. And the tires are pretty cold because we've been trundling around, so we've got a bit of understeer, a bit of oversteer, a whole bunch of not great handling at the moment. Seventh gear. Got some lights on, try to get into eighth. Still haven't gotten into eighth, not a problem. Starting to build up. The tires are still not quite there. Tires are getting there, though. They'll be there pretty soon. Next lap, they should be ready to go. That was oversteer. See, you got to get these tires ready. They're not ready. You do not have the ultimate performance, as you would expect. DRS open. Here we go, 121.16. Into eighth gear, and all 8 boxes are now green, and the gear sync protocol disappears. Now we've got a delta there on the bottom of the screen. And now I am becoming more satisfied with our tire temperatures. I'll go back to our race page, and we have a live delta now in the top left. There we go. That snap oversteer is gone. The understeer remains. Also fairly heavy on fuel at the moment, keep that in mind. 1:19.08. Start to push the braking a little bit later. Slight lockup on the unloaded right front. Low speed lockup's not really a problem. A little bit of neutral oversteer there. Nearly 3/10 up, sector 1. Claiming to be up by 6 seconds because we had an invalid lap last time through there, that's why. Had an invalid lap last time through here as well. Make sure that doesn't happen again. Let's give it some quali mode. 1:18.64, getting up to our fastest lap of the race. We are in very much what I would call race trim at the moment. More lockups of the unloaded tire. We're back on the brake bias a little bit. 7th gear, breathe off of the gas. Understeer across the front axle on these mediums. But still plenty of grip. Pick up that inside curve. Wait for the understeer on these mediums, but still 1.3. Snap oversteer, we correct for it. Lose a 10th or so, but still up on the previous session best. Covering fractions still with the hybrid boost. DRS 17.41. That was minus 1.23. I like that. Sequential numbers in the delta. Couldn't do that again if I tried. And now we're back into the no deploy mode. You'll see that number there, 65, 66, 67. That'll tick up until we are recharged back to 100. My finger just sort of slipped on my brake bias adjuster there. I've got it on the left side thumb wheel. Gloved fingers sometimes migrate into that. Go into quali mode. Push the brake deeper. Got on the throttle. Got a quarter of a second to make up. Understeer across that front axle. Made up a fraction. We'll continue to make up infinitesimally smaller fractions. Missed the turn-in point. We'll abort that one. But generally, what does this thing feel like? What does it do? Well, it's got a lot of performance, quite obviously. I mean, it's the 2021 Mercedes Formula One car. It's leading the Constructors Championship. In all likelihood, it's going to win it. And as far as the driver's title, well, may the better man win. However, the smart money has got to be with Lewis Hamilton. initially when you get out of the pits, especially if you're trundling around trying to get through the gear shift learning, you're going to lose tire temperature, and brake temperature really won't be there to begin with. So there will be understeer and there will be power oversteer, particularly out of the slower corners. So keep that in mind. The thing is going to feel very clumsy at low speed, and particularly on cold tires, it's going to feel awful. It really is, because that's not how the car was designed to run. This thing was designed to go 11 tenths all the time, except for when they have to save fuel or recharge batteries or, slow down because the FIA said to give a position back. But when you get everything up to temperature, when the tires are happy, when the brakes are happy, you have performance that's unlike anything else in sim racing today. The amount of grip that this thing has across the front end by and large, and yes, we are on these medium tires, which are not quite as nice as the softs that will run later, but you've got so much performance. You've got better change of direction in this than you've got in the 2009 Williams, which is a good 150 kilograms lighter, right? Why is that? Well, this car has got a lot more downforce. Much as I and other people have criticized the modern Formula One car of being too heavy, which I do maintain it is, you've got so much downforce generation here, and you've got the brake power to match, that it doesn't, I mean, I'm going to say that it doesn't show its size, it doesn't show its weight. And while I do believe that to be true, I mean, yeah, if they were lighter, they would skate around a lot more. If they were smaller, it would be easier to follow close together. It would be easier to go wheel to wheel. I mean, I get it, but we're not talking about that. The way that this thing uses what it has, the way that it uses the weight to plant the tires into the track, the way that it uses the long wheelbase, and the Mercedes, I think, has the longest wheelbase of any car on the grid, the way that it uses all of that to generate more downforce, to generate more clean air to the under tray and diffuser. Those are things that really conspire to create just biblical direction change in this thing. I mean, I'm still really not approaching the limit of the thing. I'm kind of approaching the limit of the tires in some corners because they're wearing a little bit now. They're in a little bit of a graining phase, and they're not totally up to snuff. Plus, they're the mediums to start with. But I mean, the way the front axle just bit there through the last corner, you're not going to get that from too many other cars. Braking performance is equally good. I mean, these are the best brakes in sim racing, no question. They bite really hard. They bite from the instant you get on the pedal, and they keep biting until you're off the pedal. Obviously, you can lock up either the front or rear axle. Obviously, you tend to run with more front brake bias in pretty much every car, this one notwithstanding. So that means, yeah, you're going to get yourself some lockups if you don't practice some sensible cadence braking there. Because remember, downforce squares with speed, which means that downforce drops at the inverse square with your decrease in speed. So, yeah, come off of the brakes, use your cadence braking, you'll be fine. But the braking distances in this thing are so unbelievably short, even coming down from top speed into a tight corner. I mean, just watch when we hit the brakes coming into turn one here. Let's see, brake board's in view. I mean, I don't know how much speed that was that we lost, but we lost well over 140 miles an hour there. In how long? 100 meters? It's crazy. When you consider that this thing weighs 740-something kilograms, I mean, you're talking astonishing power. Well over 5G on the brakes. Lockups, those are my fault. That was a sausage curb. High-speed corners, it's nailed to the road. In fact, I think the car is stationary and is just pulling the earth around underneath it. You start to understand why this thing does what it does in the real world. Coming back into the pit lane now. Pit limiter punches up. Leaves us at 50 miles an hour. That's what a pit limiter should do. And just like that, that's 10 laps. And that's about what it does in race trim, with a lot of gas on board, but we still got a lap time of, well, pull it up in the car here. Last lap was a 1:21.71. Our best lap so far, 1:16.991, set on lap 7, so I'll take that. Remember, pole position for this race was a 1:15.419, right? So we're about 1.5 seconds off of pole position, which was set in this car. So can we possibly approach that? Maybe. There is a qualifying setup for the Hungaroring preloaded in here. You'll notice that we have got soft tires, and when we get to the chassis side of the world, 22 pounds of fuel is all we got on board here. If we try to raise that appreciably, all of a sudden our ride height becomes too low, and, well, we're not going to be able to start the session, although you can run quite a bit of fuel in that qualifying trim, and you're still gonna, you're still gonna cover some distance. But then you're not gonna get the most out of the car in general because you've got too much fuel on board. So, otherwise, that's about all that's been changed. We're gonna go back to no deploy for our outlap, soft tires on board, and we're just gonna go and see how close we can get to that pole position time of a 1:15.419. So back into the cockpit with us. Get the car switched on, and an engine fired. So no deploy, we will go into, actually we'll stay in this screen because I want to demonstrate something different. I want to go to in-car adjustments here, and you can see this is how we have to deploy brake magic. There's no hotkey that we can assign to this in the controls configuration screen. I can't assign anything on my steering wheel to this. Got to be done through the black box. But we have brake magic, and I'll demonstrate that on our outlap. So, first gear punched up, and off we go. Remember, we have got to go through our gearbox sync procedure. Second gear. Got to get third gear done. There's third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Seventh is done. Now I'm going to go into brake magic. So I'm just going to hit the right arrow key, turn on brake magic, and now we go to our temperature screen. Watch the front tire temperatures. So all of our brake bias is now 75% forward. However, as I sort of drag the brakes here, front tire temps are going to start coming up very quickly. Obviously, it's not perfect, because the best way to put temperature into tires is to actually use them, but that's brake magic. Go into our quality deploy mode, and off we go in pursuit of a 1:15 and change. Front tires are still not quite up to temperature. That's okay. All over these curbs, and on the throttle, all over these exit curbs, all over these apex curbs, hard on the throttle using the AstroTurf. That was a bit of mid-corner oversteer, not too much of that, thank you. But you feel the rear end hunting around in those situations, and then the aerodynamics come back in and they grab it. It's a lot of understeer.
You go to that 5 laps of fuel.
5 laps of fuel, okay. We do back-to-back push laps, just maybe. 1:15.48. Tantalizingly close to that pole position. Just the amount of grip that you get on turn-in is astonishing. Try to keep it in. That's better. .114.72. Back in our no deploy mode. Pole position was a 115.419. So we have beaten pole position for the 2021 Hungarian Grand Prix. Does that mean that this car is too fast? No, it doesn't. It just means that I'm running in basically ideal conditions right now with no pressure and no 5.5G plus through the corners. And, you know, no risk of death. So that's the difference between me, the little underling, and Lewis Hamilton, who is, you know, basically a motorsport god. But it does show you that the car is representatively quick. And that's what iRacing is all about. We just won't talk about the MP430 after the, what was it, early 2020 overhaul? Yeah. So there it was. I mean, what more do you say about a car like this other than it's just the superlative generator to end all superlative generators? That is until we get the 2022 Mercedes, which they're also going to give us. But no, that car is not one I'm particularly looking forward to. Not because it's not going to be really cool, but it's just going to be worse than this because that's the direction Formula One is going. It's going to be heavier. It's going to be slower. It's just going to have less performance in general. It's going to have a whole lot less tires. It's going to have more weight. It's going to have a whole lot less downforce. And just in general, I'm not at all looking forward to the 2022 season because I think they have gone in entirely the wrong direction with the regulations. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about iRacing and the W12 and what Mercedes have said. Yeah, we want the world to have this. They know that we're kind of at the end of an era here with the end of the 2021 championship. It's the end of this generation of regulation. It's the end of, I mean, I heard somebody say that it's the end of the turbo hybrid era. It's not. The engines aren't changing next year. We're having the same V6 turbo hybrid layout until at least 2025, probably longer than that as well. But we're seeing the end of the really high downforce topside aero cars, and we might be seeing the end of Mercedes dominance. I mean, who knows? But what better way for Mercedes to cap off what has been an unbelievably successful time for them since 2014. They have won every Constructors Championship since. Their drivers have won every Drivers' Championship since. Lewis Hamilton winning them all but for 2016, where it was Nico Rosberg, his teammate, who beat him that time. But they have had an absolute monopoly on the ultimate of success in Formula One since 2014. And maybe we're seeing the end of that. If Lewis Hamilton wins the championship on Sunday, it will be his 8th driver's title. Nobody has ever done that. And this would be the car with which he does it. And to have that available to us, mere mortals, in a simulator, yes, but to get this close to being in the cockpit and to get a sense of what it must be like to drive this thing in the very limited capacity that I have, it's got to be really a transcendent sort of experience to be able to drive this car. And for us to be given the gift, really, from Mercedes and from iRacing to just get some small minutia of what that must be like, it's a really provocative sort of thing. Because it also calls into question the future of collaborations between game designers and manufacturers and Mercedes, the first car company, is willing to put their Formula One car into one of these simulators before it's been retired. That can only mean good things, right? I hope so. At any rate, though, that's what I have to say about the W12. I haven't gone quite into the depth that I wanted simply because, unfortunately, I'm very pressed for time these days. But what I will give you at the end are some hot laps here around the Hungaroring. I'm going to try to better the lap that we just did. Again, we beat the pole position time for the 2021 Hungarian Grand Prix, but again, we have got different weather conditions, different track conditions, and it's just not really fair for me to say that I'm faster than Lewis Hamilton, but I don't know, a little Easter egg to throw in, I suppose. So some hot laps to come from Hungary with the W12 to close this out. Enjoy the sights and sounds without hearing me bark all over them, because why are you talking? I want to hear the engine. Read the title, people. But hot laps to come, and I do thank you all very much for watching. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much, and of course, we will see you soon.